An Israeli strike has killed 8 people in the Lebanese city of Sidon.
What we have seen is missiles intercepted in the skies above Tel Aviv.
We've got another one that's coming here now.
Israeli forces have shelled the town of Barachet in South Lebanon. The attack.
A ceasefire was announced, and within hours, missiles were flying over Tel Aviv, drones were slamming into Kuwait, fires were burning near Abu Dhabi, and Beirut was bracing for one of the biggest strike waves in months. So here's the question. Was this ever a real ceasefire? Or was it just a headline designed to calm the world while the region moved one step closer to something far more dangerous? That is what makes this moment so shocking. On paper, diplomacy was supposed to begin. In reality, the battlefield only expanded. Oil prices swung wildly, governments rushed out statements, and behind the scenes, military planners were already preparing for something much bigger. In this video, we're breaking down what really happened, why it matters, and what could come next. What unfolded in the first 24 hours after the ceasefire announcement was not calm, not stability, but a rapid chain of escalation across multiple cities. It began with ballistic missiles launched toward Tel Aviv and Beersheba, striking shortly after the agreement was made public. Instead of signaling restraint, this move immediately raised questions about whether the ceasefire had any real operational meaning on the ground. Almost simultaneously, attention shifted east as a coordinated drone swarm targeted Kuwait City, focusing on critical infrastructure. Reports indicated damage to oil facilities, power systems, and water desalination plants, showing that these strikes were not random, but carefully selected to disrupt daily life and economic stability. As the situation intensified, regional defenses were pushed into action. In the United Arab Emirates, air defense systems engaged incoming threats, while Bahrain reported intercepting dozens of drones and multiple missiles within the same 24-hour window. The skies across the Gulf region turned into active combat zones, with interception systems firing repeatedly in response to incoming threats. According to international reporting from sources like Reuters and Al Jazeera, the scale and coordination of these attacks suggested pre-planned operations rather than spontaneous reactions. What makes this sequence truly alarming is the timing. These actions did not occur days or weeks after the ceasefire. They happened within hours. This creates a powerful and uncomfortable reality. Every major player involved appeared to act in contradiction to the very agreement that was supposed to reduce tensions. Instead of de-escalation, the region experienced a synchronized surge in military activity across Tel Aviv, Beersheba, Kuwait City, Abu Dhabi, and Bahrain. For ordinary people living in these cities, this wasn't a geopolitical debate. It was sirens, explosions, and uncertainty about what comes next. And when you step back and look at the full picture, one question naturally emerges. If this is what a ceasefire looks like in today's world, where missiles, drones, and counterattacks continue almost instantly, then what does an actual full-scale war even look like anymore? To understand why this ceasefire collapsed almost instantly, you have to look beyond the explosions and focus on the politics driving them. On the surface, leaders in Washington, D.C., Tehran, and Tel Aviv were presenting this as a step toward stability. But beneath that surface, there was a deep and unresolved problem. None of the parties actually trusted each other. Iran viewed the agreement as a tactical pause, Israel saw it as a temporary window to maintain pressure, and the United States appeared divided internally on whether the deal was even viable. According to multiple international reports, including coverage from Reuters and Axios, U.S. officials were already skeptical, with some reportedly calling Iran's proposal a disaster and a catastrophe even before it was accepted. Adding to the confusion was the sudden nature of the agreement itself. Former President Trump's quick acceptance of the deal caught even senior officials off guard, suggesting that this was not a carefully aligned strategy, but more of a political decision made under pressure. And when agreements are rushed, the details often become unclear or contested. That is exactly what happened here. Each side walked away with its own interpretation of what the ceasefire actually meant, What actions were allowed, what targets were off limits, and what counted as a violation. This is where the real issue lies. A ceasefire only works when all sides share the same understanding of the rules. In this case, there was no shared understanding. Iran continued strikes it may have viewed as justified retaliation. Israel pushed forward with operations it considered defensive necessity, and the United States attempted to balance diplomacy with military readiness. The result was not peace, but parallel actions moving in completely opposite directions. A simple way to understand this is to compare it to everyday life. Imagine signing a contract where every person reads a different version of the terms. One thinks the agreement starts immediately, another believes it begins later, and a third adds conditions that were never clearly discussed. That contract is not going to hold, and that is exactly what we are seeing here. So when we say this was a ceasefire, it is important to be precise. This was not a unified peace agreement built on mutual trust and clarity. It was a pause filled with conditions that were never fully agreed upon, implemented in a region where every actor is preparing for the next move rather than stepping back from conflict. If you want to understand where this conflict is heading, don't just look at who is attacking, look at what they're targeting. Because the choice of targets reveals far more than official statements ever will. In this case, the strikes on Lavon Island, Habshan in Abu Dhabi, and Beirut tell a very clear story. These are not random locations, and they are not purely military targets. They sit at the heart of something much bigger: energy, economy, and strategic pressure. Take Lavon Island in Iran. The strike on its oil refinery was not just about damaging infrastructure, it was about hitting a critical node in Iran's energy network. Oil is not just a resource, it is leverage. Disrupting it sends a message not only to Iran, but the global markets. According to international coverage from sources like Al Jazeera and Bloomberg, fires broke out at the refinery, immediately raising concerns about supply disruption and economic impact. This is economic warfare in its clearest form. Now shift to Habshan in Abu Dhabi, one of the most important gas processing facilities in the region. When drone and missile activity forced operations to halt and caused fires, it wasn't just an attack on a facility, it was a direct signal to the Gulf's energy backbone. Even temporary disruptions here ripple across global energy markets. It affects exports, pricing, and investor confidence. This is no longer about winning territory, it's about controlling economic pressure points. Then there's Beirut, where Israeli forces launched one of their largest strike waves against Hezbollah targets since the conflict began. Over 100 sites were reportedly hit, according to regional military statements. While these strikes still have a military dimension, their scale and location indicate something broader: a strategy aimed at weakening networks, supply lines, and influence structures that extend beyond borders. When you connect these dots, a pattern emerges. This conflict is no longer centered on traditional military bases or front lines. It has evolved into something far more complex. Modern wars are not fought only with tanks and troops. They are fought through energy systems, infrastructure, and economic choke points. The battlefield now includes refineries, gas plants, and supply chains that keep entire regions functioning. And that changes everything. Because when energy becomes a target, the impact is not limited to one country. It spreads across borders, into global markets, and eventually into everyday life for people far removed from the conflict itself.
To really understand what's happening, you have to step back and look at the bigger strategy behind the actions in Tel Aviv, Tehran, and Beirut. Because this is not random chaos, this is calculated escalation from all sides, each driven by its own goals. Start with Iran. By launching strikes so soon after the ceasefire announcement, Iran is sending a clear signal: it will not appear weak. In geopolitical terms, perception matters as much as power. If Iran had stayed quiet, it could have been seen as backing down under pressure. Instead, it demonstrated that it still has reach, capability, and the willingness to use both. Now look at Israel. Its response, especially the large-scale strikes in Beirut, shows a different kind of urgency. Israel's priority is not just retaliation, it's prevention. The goal is to eliminate launch sites, disrupt networks like Hezbollah, and reduce the ability of future attacks before they even happen. According to international reporting from outlets like Reuters and BBC, Israeli operations have increasingly focused on targeting infrastructure linked to missile and drone capabilities. This is about staying one step ahead, even if it means intensifying the conflict in the short term. Then there's the United States, operating from Washington, D.C., trying to walk a very narrow line. On one hand, it wants to avoid a full-scale regional war that could spiral out of control. On the other, it cannot afford to appear passive or lose influence in the region. So the strategy becomes one of controlled pressure, support allies, maintain military readiness, but avoid triggering a direct confrontation. However, as reports from Axios suggest, even within U.S. leadership, there is disagreement about how sustainable this approach really is. When you put all of this together, a simple but powerful idea emerges. Each side is trying to look strong without triggering total war. And that creates a dangerous balance, because every action meant to show strength can also be seen as escalation by the other side. It's like walking a tightrope where one wrong move can tip everything over. And this raises a deeper question that applies far beyond this conflict. If countries are actively preparing for war, building capabilities, launching strikes, and responding with force, can they really avoid war at the same time? Or are they slowly moving toward it, step by step, even while claiming to prevent it?
While missiles and drones grab the headlines, the real story often shows up somewhere else: oil prices. Right after the escalation, Brent crude surged to around $95.80 per barrel, signaling fear across global markets. But then something unexpected happened. Prices suddenly dropped, even though attacks were still ongoing across the region. At first glance, this looks confusing. If tensions are rising, shouldn't prices keep going up? The answer reveals how markets actually think. They don't react to stability, they react to uncertainty. According to international financial reporting from outlets like Bloomberg and Reuters, traders were trying to process two conflicting signals at the same time. On one side, you had real attacks on energy infrastructure in places like Lebanon Island and Abu Dhabi, which should push prices higher. On the other side, there was a ceasefire announcement, even if it was shaky, which suggested a possible slowdown in escalation. Markets got stuck between fear and hope, and that tug-of-war caused prices to swing. This is important because oil is not just another commodity, it is the foundation of the global economy. When oil prices rise sharply, transportation costs increase, businesses pay more to operate, and eventually consumers feel it through higher fuel prices and rising costs of goods. When prices fall suddenly, it often signals uncertainty rather than relief. It means traders are unsure about what comes next. And this is where it becomes personal. This situation isn't just happening in distant cities like Tel Aviv or Kuwait City. It directly affects your daily life. The price you pay at the fuel station, your electricity bills, even the cost of groceries are all connected to what's happening in these regions. Energy markets are global, and disruptions in one part of the world ripple outward very quickly. There's also a deeper lesson here. Headlines can be loud, dramatic, and sometimes misleading. Governments make statements, leaders announce deals, and media narratives shift quickly. But oil prices tend to reflect what is actually happening beneath the surface. They react to risk, supply threats, and real-world disruptions. So if you want to understand where things are heading, don't just follow the political statements. Watch the oil market, because more often than not, oil tells you the truth that headlines are still trying to figure out. What we are witnessing today across Tel Aviv, Kuwait City, and Abu Dhabi is not just another regional conflict. It is a clear example of how warfare has fundamentally changed in 2026. In the past, wars were defined by visible front lines, armies facing each other, and battles fought in specific locations. But that model is rapidly disappearing. Today, war is no longer limited to one domain. It is a combination of missiles, drones, cyber operations, and economic disruption all happening at the same time. One of the most striking developments is the rise of drone warfare. Unlike traditional missiles, drones are cheaper, more flexible, and can be deployed in large numbers. Reports from international coverage, including BBC and Al Jazeera, highlight how drone swarms have been used to overwhelm even advanced air defense systems. Instead of relying on a single, powerful strike, attackers now use volume and coordination. When dozens of drones approach simultaneously, even the most sophisticated systems struggle to intercept all of them. It becomes a game of probability. Some will always get through. At the same time, these physical attacks are often supported by less visible forms of conflict. Cyber operations can disrupt communication networks, while economic pressure targets energy systems and financial stability. This creates a layered form of warfare where multiple tools are used together to achieve maximum impact. A strike on infrastructure is not just about destruction, it's about creating long-term disruption. What makes this even more complex is the absence of a clear battlefield. The traditional idea of a front line no longer applies. The battlefield is now spread across cities, infrastructure, and even digital networks. A person living in Abu Dhabi or Kuwait City may be hundreds of miles away from a military base, yet still directly affected by the conflict through drone strikes or energy disruptions. This leads to a powerful realization. The battlefield is no longer a line, it's everywhere. And that changes how conflicts are fought, how they are experienced, and how they are understood by the world. Perhaps the most unsettling part of this transformation is how it blurs the line between war and peace. In 2026, even something officially labeled as a ceasefire can still look and feel like full-scale war. Attacks continue, defenses remain active, and uncertainty becomes the new normal. This is not just an evolution of warfare, it is a complete redefinition of it. After everything that has happened, from missile strikes in Tel Aviv to drone attacks in Kuwait City and infrastructure damage in Abu Dhabi, the most important question is no longer what just happened, but what happens next. Because moments like this are rarely isolated. They usually point toward a larger shift that is still unfolding. And right now, there are several possibilities, each more serious than the last. The first question analysts are asking is whether this was simply a warning or the beginning of a sustained campaign. In many past conflicts, initial strikes were used to test defenses, measure reactions, and send a message. According to international coverage from sources like Reuters and CNN, early phases of escalation often reveal capabilities that are later used more aggressively. If that pattern holds here, then what we've seen so far may only be the opening phase. The second concern is whether current defense systems can keep up with this evolving style of warfare. As discussed earlier, drone swarms and precision-guided missiles are changing the balance. Even highly advanced systems are being stretched under repeated attacks. Interceptors are expensive, supply chains are limited, and response times are being tested in real-world conditions. If these systems begin to show consistent gaps, it could shift the strategic advantage toward those launching the attacks rather than those defending against them. Then comes the bigger, more uncomfortable question. Are we moving toward a larger regional war? Right now, countries are trying to operate in a controlled escalation mode, responding without crossing certain thresholds. But history shows that this balance is extremely fragile. One miscalculation, one strike that goes further than intended, or one unexpected casualty event can quickly change the situation. Reports from policy analysts and global security experts suggest that when multiple actors are involved, the risk of unintended escalation increases significantly. And this brings us to the reality of the moment. We're no longer looking at a simple conflict with clear boundaries. We're looking at a dynamic situation where every action creates a reaction, and every reaction raises the stakes further. So when you step back and look at the bigger picture, one question naturally comes to mind. Is this just temporary chaos that will settle down, or are we witnessing the early stages of something much bigger that is still taking shape? As the dust settles over cities like Tel Aviv, Beirut, and beyond, it's easy to focus only on strategy, missiles, and headlines. But behind every strike, there are real people. Families disrupted, lives shaken, and a constant sense of uncertainty that no headline can fully capture. This is not just about geopolitics. It's about human lives caught in the middle of decisions made far away from them. And maybe that's where this conversation truly matters, not just in understanding what's happening, but in asking what should happen next. I'd really like to hear your perspective on this. Do you see this as a temporary phase or something much bigger unfolding? Your thoughts genuinely add value to this discussion. If you want a deeper understanding of how we reached this point, I recommend watching the previous video on this channel. It connects many of the dots we discussed today. And if you appreciate clear, honest breakdowns like this, consider supporting the channel. A simple subscribe helps us continue putting in the time and effort to bring you content that actually matters.